Good Saturday afternoon. This is a brief update on Tropical Storm Lee and Hurricane Katia located in the central Atlantic. The latest 4 p.m. advisory on Tropical Storm Lee indicates that maximum sustained winds are 60 miles per hour. It's now beginning to move off toward the north at 3 miles per hour, but notice that the forward motion is expected to be very slow, especially over the next 48 hours, and by 1 p.m. Monday, the center is still expected to be near Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Also notice that the tropical storm warnings have been extended eastward all the way to Destin, Florida, and that is because the highest winds and rainfall are expected to remain just east of the center. And as mentioned here at 28storms.com, over the last 36 hours, the primary rainfall is going to happen over southern Terrebonne, Plaquemines, St. Bernard, eastern Orleans, the eastern half of the North Shore, the lower counties of Mississippi and southern Alabama, with the risk of tropical storm winds existing all the way to the coastal areas of the Florida Panhandle. Also, interest here across central Alabama and central Mississippi. Also need to be on the lookout here because you could also get some inland flooding as the rainfall totals are expected to exceed 6 to 7 inches. The latest model consensus is still in full agreement with the official forecast track that this system will be very slow to move over lower Mississippi and Louisiana, and then it's going to eventually move more toward the northeast as a trough from the Midwest begins to dip more toward the south. Now, several reliable sources across southeast Louisiana are already beginning to declare that the major flooding threat for the New Orleans metro is coming to an end, but I would rather be a little bit more cautious than that, especially since this pressure to the south of Louisiana has dipped below 990 millibars. We're now down to 989 according to the latest Hurricane Hunter flight. So the center, despite it being partially exposed due to westerly dry air being funneled into the center, the storm is still deepening technically, and that's going to help continue to funnel in a lot of moisture off of the Gulf of Mexico. So all interests in southeast Louisiana and the central Gulf Coast need to be keeping a very close eye on the system, especially if you live in a flood-prone area, and the chances there for some of the outer bands to really train over your location. We already have several flood warnings in effect for many counties here, and as you can see, this is a constant southerly fetch coming off of the Gulf of Mexico, so the flood threat is going to persist for at least another 48 to 72 hours. This is the latest water vapor imagery showing that the mid to upper level disturbance is still over southwest Louisiana, with that dry air still beginning to funnel in here, and that's why we are still seeing some breaks over southeast Louisiana, which is definitely good news because we're going to allow to have some breaks here, and that's going to allow some of the water to begin to go down before we get another round of heavy rain, more than likely into the overnight hours. Based on the latest Doppler radar estimates from Mobile, Alabama, we see that coastal portions of Jackson and Mobile counties are already under flood warnings due to having received already 6 to 8 inches of rainfall, and we are far from finished. We also have flood warnings in effect for the inland counties of Stone, George, and Perry counties here across southern Mississippi. And as we switch over to the Slidell radar, we see that the rainfall totals are already beginning to near 10 inches here across Plaquemines Parish, Lafourche, and even into Terrebonne Parish. So obviously the rain totals are going up, and I'm afraid that we still have another 48 to 60 hours at the very least left to go with this storm. And as we go ahead and take a live look at the latest radar, we see that the outer bands are still funneling in, especially along the Mississippi and Alabama coast. It doesn't look like we're going to be receiving much of a break during the overnight hours tonight. Fortunately for New Orleans, we're still getting bands of showers, and in fact a flood warning has just been issued for the lower half of the city and portions of Jefferson Parish just to the south. But we are still seeing breaks here due to that dry air. But again, there's still going to be some flood concern over the next 3 days, because that low-level circulation is still well off to the southwest. This is the latest HPC 5-day precipitation forecast, and we can still expect at least 15 to 18 additional inches of rainfall across portions of southeast Louisiana, southern Mississippi, and even into southwest Alabama. And notice how as this low-pressure system begins to move more toward the northeast, we expect precipitation totals to remain high even as far as the Appalachians as it continues to head off in that overall direction. We are now looking at the latest run from the 12Z ECMWF model, and this model has had the best overall feel with this tropical storm ever since it developed a few days ago. And as we go into 24 hours, this is still a fairly concerning forecast. As you can see, the European is not expecting much in the way of any forward progression whatsoever. we do have the long wave trough beginning to dip down out of the Great Lakes, but it's not dipping down quite enough. And as we go into 48 and 72 hours, we finally begin to see some easterly progression here by day 3, but notice it's still only over central Alabama, so this whole entire area is going to be receiving at least some flood threat over the next 3 days. And also, as we switch our attention over to Hurricane Katia, notice that the models are continuing to shift a little bit more toward the west. As we go into day 4 and day 5, we see that there is still a fairly good amount of ridging over the northwest Atlantic near Bermuda, and also the remnants of Tropical Storm Lee are still hanging steady over the Tennessee Valley. And if this low pressure system were to persist more so over the southeast United States throughout the period, then that could be a problem for New England, as it looks like that would help set up the pattern to where we could have at least another close call with a hurricane coming in from the southeast. As we see here, by day 6, the hurricane is continuing to deepen while moving closer to the outer banks of North Carolina, but the good news is that by day 7, the model is still showing it turning a little bit more toward the north and just off the east coast, while the remnants of Lee and some additional mid-level energy begins to spread into the Tennessee and Ohio valleys. And overall, this is a pattern that bears watching, because this is very conducive for at least a brush here along the New England states. And as we go into day 8, we notice that the storm has just missed Cape Cod just to the east, and is beginning to spread into the Canadian Maritimes. Now, several other model members are still a bit east of where the European is taking the hurricane, but the trend is still toward the west, and once again this definitely bears some monitoring. Of course, the Hurricane Center is still taking a very close look at the models, and as a result they are continuously adjusting their forecast track as needed, and this track is definitely a bit more toward the west, especially if you compare it to where it was a few days ago. So all interests from North Carolina northward are simply advised to keep a close watch on this system, and that is exactly what we will be doing here at 28storms.com. Please check back sometime late this evening for another extensive video analysis on Tropical Storm Lee, as the flood concern will still be there. And if it looks like the weather conditions along the Mississippi and Alabama coast will be going downhill even more than they are right now, we will begin live coverage starting once again sometime tomorrow afternoon to provide you the latest and best information possible on Tropical Storm Lee as it continues to pummel much of the central Gulf Coast. So that's your update for this afternoon. Please check back again later, and in the meantime you can get the latest updates if you're on the go or without power at the Hurricane Tracker app. Once again, that's available on iPhone and iPad.